Do your pictures lack sharpness? Are they blurry or out of focus? Kevin Raposo here with SpeedyPhotographer.com, and today I'm going to break down my 8-step blueprint to taking pictures that are sharp and in focus. If you follow these 8 steps, you will immediately begin taking sharper pictures with the camera and the lens that you already have. You don't need expensive equipment or anything aside from the gear that you already own. Also, if you stick around until the end of the video, I've partnered with Kingston to give away 2 free 128GB React Plus SD cards. These are professional, top-of-the-line memory cards with blazing fast speeds for transferring your photos and videos. So keep watching and I'll talk about how you can win one for free a little later on. So the first step to taking sharper pictures is to improve your shooting technique. The way that you actually hold your camera while you're taking a picture can make a big difference in the overall sharpness of your image. Your goal should be to reduce camera shake caused by your own personal movement. And to do this, you can apply these 4 simple techniques. Number 1, push your elbows in toward your chest. Number 2, press the camera against your face. Number 3, hold the camera with your entire hand, and if you have a smaller camera, use your pinky finger to support the base. And number 4, before you take a picture, keep your index finger resting on the shutter button so that when you press it, you do so smoothly and gently. These 4 techniques will reduce the chance of human error. Moving on to step 2, choose the right shutter speed. If you want to take a sharp picture, your shutter speed needs to be fast enough to freeze your subject in the frame. If your subject is moving too quickly and your shutter speed is too slow, the subject will appear to be blurry. For example, the picture on the left was shot with the shutter speed of 1/500th of a second. And if we zoom in, we can see that the ball appears to be spinning and blurry. Whereas the picture on the right was shot with the shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second. And here, the ball appears to be sharp and in focus. So this is what I would personally recommend. When shooting a fast-moving subject, such as sports or wildlife, use at least a 1/1000th shutter speed. When shooting a slow-moving subject, such as corporate event photography, use at least a 1/250th shutter speed. When shooting a stationary subject, such as headshots or family portraits, use at least a 1/125th shutter speed. And when shooting a completely inanimate object, such as real estate or landscapes, use at least a 1/60th shutter speed. And if you're using a tripod to keep your camera still instead of hand holding it, feel free to drop this down as low as you need in order to properly expose the picture. On to step 3, you need to shoot with the right focus setting. Most cameras will include 2 main focus modes: one-shot autofocus and continuous autofocus. When using one-shot autofocus, the camera will lock in focus once. The focus won't change if the subject moves. Whereas when using continuous autofocus, the camera will keep adjusting focus as the subject moves closer to or further away from the camera. Both of these modes are appropriate for different situations, but here are the settings that I recommend. If you're shooting a moving subject, you want to use continuous autofocus. And when you're shooting a stationary subject, you want to use one-shot autofocus, or you can even manually focus the lens yourself. Choosing the right focus mode will ensure that your subject remains sharp. The key is to understand each mode's purpose and then select accordingly to achieve what you're looking for. Moving on to step 4, shoot in good lighting. Most new photographers think that good lighting is about brightness, but it isn't. It's also about contrast and color temperature. Contrast refers to the difference between the brighter and the darker areas of your picture. Place your subject in direct light while using a darker background to create more contrast. This will increase the perceived sharpness of your image. Have a look at the picture on the left. It was shot in direct light taken underneath one of the stadium lamps, and it has a much darker background because night has fallen. Whereas the picture on the right is a lot more flat because it was taken about an hour earlier at the same stadium without the stadium lights on, and it was a cloudy day. You can really see the difference in contrast between these 2 images. Now, color temperature refers to the differences between the various lighting sources in your scene. The sun, the shade, and even the light bulbs in your home will have a different color temperature that affect the look of your picture. In this first video clip, you can see what happens when you have mixed color temperatures. Some parts of the home look very orange, while other parts of the home look very blue. Compare that to this second video clip where the light bulbs inside the house are the same color temperature as the daylight outside. This creates a very even, sharp-looking image which can't be matched by the first example. So we're about halfway through this video, and if you found it helpful so far, you might also want to check out Speedy Photographer, the fastest and ultimate online photography school, where I teach you everything you need to know about how to turn your your photography hobby into an actual business with professional quality images, and it only takes 10 days. Yes, believe it or not, the curriculum has been designed as efficiently as possible, so be sure to check that out if you're interested in learning more. Links in the description below. Moving on to step 5, shoot with the right aperture. Aperture affects the depth of field and the sharpness of your picture. If you shoot with a low aperture, meaning that you have a shallow depth of field, your pictures are likely to be softer. If you shoot with a high aperture, meaning that you have a deep depth of field, then your pictures are likely to be sharper. But you can't just crank up your aperture to the maximum possible setting and assume that everything will be razor sharp. Every lens has an ideal range where it performs at its sharpest, and there may be situations where you need to shoot with a low aperture in order to compensate for a lack of light. So if you have perfect lighting conditions, you should experiment with your aperture settings to see what will compose the best possible image. Now for step 6, use an electronic shutter. Modern mirrorless cameras will often include an electronic shutter, and this controls the exposure time by electronically opening and closing the camera's image sensor. Unlike a mechanical shutter in older cameras that physically moves in order to expose the sensor, an electronic shutter operates silently and has no moving parts. This also completely eliminates the possibility of shutter shake, which is vibration being caused by the shutter, resulting in a less than tack sharp image. With that said, it is worth mentioning that electronic shutters do have some downsides, including potential banding, flickering, and rolling shutter, but if your goal is purely to capture the sharpest possible image, using the electronic shutter can help you to do that. On to step 7, reduce your distance from the subject. The further away you are from your subject, the more likely that your sharpness will be reduced by heat waves or autofocus inaccuracies. This first picture was taken on a scorching hot afternoon in September. The subject here was about 20 meters away. Heat waves were rising from the turf, and if we zoom in closely, we can see a lot of distortion in the background. The bokeh doesn't look as smooth or as clean, and we can see that the subject isn't tack sharp. Whereas this second picture was taken on the same afternoon, but the subject is now only 10 meters away. And if we zoom in, we can see that the heat waves have been significantly reduced, and the subject is much sharper than it was in the previous image. By reducing our distance from the subject, the lens and the autofocus no longer struggles with the environment. Now, of course, the best way to deal with this type of scenario would actually just be to shoot at a different type of day or to shoot in a different environment, but as photographers, we all know that that isn't always possible. Finally, step 8, choose the right ISO setting. Shooting at a higher ISO is sometimes necessary when dealing with low light situations, but it will result in increased digital noise. In this example, you can see that as my ISO is being increased slowly, it will progressively result in a deterioration of image quality. Noisy images lose contrast, detail, and sharpness. These images were all shot at ISO 25,600, and you can see that there's just clearly something missing. A very important exercise for every photographer is taking the time to understand what the highest acceptable ISO setting is on your camera. There is no magic answer because only you can determine that, but knowing what you'll be happy with is the easiest way to push the limits of the gear that you already own. But remember, if you find that your ISO is too high and you want to bring it down, you can also adjust your shutter speed and your aperture settings to allow more light into the camera. Photography is often a juggling act as you try to find the perfect balance between these 3 settings. Alright, so contest time. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I've partnered with Kingston to give away 2 free 128GB React Plus SD cards. These are some of the fastest SD cards on the market, delivering insane read and write speeds for beginner and professional photographers. And if you're interested in winning one for yourself, all you have to do to enter the contest is to leave a comment below. Everybody who leaves a comment, literally everybody, will be automatically entered into a random draw, and 2 lucky winners will be selected and contacted by me. The deadline and all other details can be found in the description below, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more valuable content just like this, and I'll see you in the next video.